Okay, we'll just give it another minute. Welcome to all of you who have joined. Welcome to today's Water Availability Task Force meeting. All right, we can probably kick it off now. Hi, everyone. I'm Kat Weissmiller with Colorado Water Conservation Board. I don't have any announcements to kick it off today. We'll have some information to share after our reports from the state climatologists and NRCS. But just want to welcome you all back from a long weekend. And I will turn it over to, I assume Becky will be doing the presentation, and make you a co-host. Just give me 1 second here.
Okay.
All right, you should be able to share your screen now.
Does that look good?
Looks great.
All righty. Go ahead and get started. This is a fun one to do because I usually feel like such a broken record talking about drought, and now I get to talk about a bunch of water. So I am Becky Bollinger. I am the Assistant State Climatologist with the Colorado Climate Center, which is at Colorado State University. Let's see, how am I moving this forward? I got this great picture. We've been doing lots of rainbow chasing with all these active days this year, and that's my daughter pointing out this very vivid rainbow in our neighborhood. So we're going to be starting off by talking about some of the things that have happened water year to date, and a little bit of a closer look at the spring and particularly May. So this is a look at the precipitation ranking across the state for the water year to date. So starting in October, going through May, that's an 8-month period. The rank is there at the top. The statewide rank says it's the 33rd wettest out of that 128-year record. And where you see the green shading means areas that have been wetter than that near normal range for that 8-month period. So we can see along the Front Range and extending towards Fort Morgan area, we've had wetter conditions for that 8-month period. And then on the west slope, we can see a lot of areas showing up with wetter conditions. As you get into those darker greens, the rank is even higher for wetter. So that darkest green shading that you see in Garfield and Rio Blanco counties in Western Colorado is showing up as the record wettest for that 8-month time period in that 128-year record. Everywhere where it's white is really in that near normal range, in that middle range, and a couple of dry spots pop up, but nothing really bad. So now we're going to look at the statewide ranks here on the left side of the map. The map in the upper left corner is for the spring, so that March, April, May time period. What was the precipitation rank? And for Colorado, you can see we ranked kind of right there in that middle category. And we had wetter to the west and drier to the east, but right near that normal range around us for the spring. And then if you look at the bottom left, that's specifically for May, which shows up, I think the 99 means the 99th driest. And so the table on the right side shows how each month has ranked in terms of precipitation going back to October. So where you can see those greens, again, they're ranked in the wetter category for the entire state. So May came out as the 31st wettest. We can see that March and December were also wetter, and January was a big month where it ranked as much above normal category in the 10th wettest. And we've had 1 month that ranked drier, but not too bad, and that was April. So there's looking at the precipitation ranking map just for May, and we ranked as the 31st wettest. And probably the reason that we didn't get wetter was because there were some dry spots in the state, particularly if you go up into the northwest around Routt and Moffat counties and into North Park. And there around the Grand Junction area, it was also drier. But if you remember, combining it with all the previous months of the water year, they're still in pretty good condition. So this was a very short-term dry pattern there. And then where you see the dark green that kind of envelops going into parts of Park County, into the Colorado Springs area and north through the Front Range and in the Eastern Plains, that was ranked as the top 10 wettest for that region. Weren't quite to a miracle May like 2015, but we did do very well in May. And I wanted to show what those totals specifically looked like. So this is looking at the actual amounts that accumulated for May. So the shading is showing what the PRISM gridded data set estimates that precipitation was, and then each dot is either from a co-op station or a CoCoRaHS gauge, and how much accumulated through May 31st. And the big winners to point out were Castle Rock and Aurora, many locations around there getting between 9 and 10 inches just through the month of May. Now, the northeast corner of our state and the Northern Front Range are climatologically wettest during May. That is the wettest month of the year. But that normal typically ranges from 2.5 to 3.5 inches. So that would be more your purple colors. And what we're seeing with those red colors and oranges and into yellows is much above average. Even in the areas that didn't get that, we did quite well. So in the southeast corner of the state, we still saw areas getting 2 inches or more. And even as we cross the divide, we are also seeing widespread 1 to 2 inches. And you can see where those dry spots are here that did still get some precipitation activity, just not quite enough to keep up with normal. And that's right around the Grand Junction area and into Northwest Colorado. Switching over to talk about temperature, cool anomalies have really dominated the state for much of water year 2023. So this is again looking at the 8 months rank going from October through May. This time we're ranking temperature. So if we saw reds, that would mean above average anomalies and ranking in the warmer temperatures. But we really don't. We do see a lot of white. So right there in the middle range. And then we see some patches of blue, which are showing areas that ranked on the colder side of the scale for the 128-year record. So the statewide maps to the left, the top left one, again, is showing the springtime temperature ranks, March, April, May. You can see that 46 there right in the middle, but getting a little bit to the colder side if you think that there were 129 years in that March, April, May record. So going a little bit towards the colder side, but still in that near normal range. And then looking at May, it was actually a little bit warmer. So in that above average ranking there. So the table on the right shows the ranking breakdown for the state for each month. And we see a lot of grays and a lot of blues. In fact, May was our first above average month for this water year. So that is pretty impressive given how much warm anomalies actually dominate our pattern as of late, but that has not been the case in water year 2023. So May did rank as the 16th warmest May in the record. And here's what those May temperature anomalies look like across the state. Where the warmest temperatures are partly does coincide with where those drier areas were around Grand Junction and in Northwest Colorado. But we also see some as we get around the Wyoming border across the state, and also down around El Paso and Lincoln, or not El Paso, Elbert and Lincoln counties, where we had some very warm anomalies there as well. All right, we're going to shift over and talk about more current conditions, a little bit of May, but also what's been happening in June. I went on a trip to Las Vegas, and when I was driving back, which was, I believe, June 11th, came across this very impressive storm that was dumping rain on Fort Collins and Windsor to the north. And so I took a picture of that there. That was also the day that Milliken was hit pretty hard. We're talking about 2.5 inches to 4 inches in a 6-hour time period. So quite impressive amounts there. So here's a look at the temperature anomalies for the last 30 days. Now, this is a little bit interesting. It does include the last 11 days of May, and I've already said that May overall was warmer, but when you take the end of May and put it with what we've seen in June, mostly we've been in that cool anomaly pattern. So most, pretty much everywhere, the more south you go, the stronger it gets. We're looking at anomalies that are 1 degree cooler than average to 4 degrees cooler than average, and then a little bit closer to average as you get closer to the Wyoming border. I wanted to share this because I thought it was quite interesting that a lot of this has been driven by just cooler than average high temperatures. So our low temperatures are not necessarily cooler. In fact, we have a lot of days where the low temperature is above average. It's really our high temperatures that are being limited by that continued storm activity we've been experiencing, all those clouds, all the rain, keeping those temperatures down during the day. But it also means that it's keeping the low temperatures from dropping too much at night. So that higher humidity is making low temperatures warmer in a lot of cases. So here's an example from Denver International Airport, where we can see the top graph is showing the high temperature for the daily high temperatures for June so far. And then the next graph down is the low temperatures for June so far. And then there's some stats there in the lower left corner. So as of, this was as of June 18th, there had not been any high temperatures above average. All 18 days, the high temperatures were below average. But in terms of the low temperatures, the blue graph, about half of them have been above average. Oop, I get that back. So here's looking at precipitation. I'm combining basically what's happened in June with what's happened in May. So this is going from May 1st through yesterday morning, and really just quite an impressive map everywhere east of the divide, pretty much, with the exception of the San Luis Valley area. But all of the eastern plains, we're looking at amounts for that 2-month period that are well above average, widespread, 5 inches or more. The yellow are areas that have gotten more than 10 inches in that time period. And you can see a lot of yellow on the map. So really impressive. West of the divide, still not too bad. We're seeing widespread 2 to 3, even 4 inches in some spots. And the low point continues around Grand Junction there, where they've gotten about 1/2 inch in that same time period. So this is a specific look at Lyman, which happened to show record wet time period for May 1st through June 18th. So Russ made this up for me this morning to kind of show how 2023 ranks for that time period, May 1st through June 18th, compared to all the other years in the record. And Lyman had a pretty long record to look at. So we're looking at precipitation is the x-axis. So the further right you go on the graph, the wetter it is. And then temperature is, sorry about that, temperature is the y-axis. So as you go up, it gets warmer. And here we can see the line, the dashed lines are for average. The vertical line is average precipitation. The horizontal line is average temperature. So if you're in this upper right quadrant, you're in the warm and wet quadrant, which is where Lyman has been. If you remember, temperature anomalies for May were very warm. And also it's been record wettest. The second year in the record is 1967. And then third is that miracle May 2015. So a very wet time period for a lot of areas. This is focusing in just on June. So we know May was wet, but how much has accumulated specifically in June so far? And we can see a lot of areas getting between 5 and 8 inches throughout Northeast Colorado, all along the Front Range. Even Southeast Colorado still getting 2.5 to 3 inches. We have seen more activity on the west slope in June, particularly in the Northwest compared to what we saw in May. So some nice wet patterns there. So how does this compare to average when we look at the standardized precipitation index? So the SPI is really a way to compare the amount of precipitation that has accumulated compared to that same time scale and time period. And the warm colors, the yellow, orange, red, are based on drought categories. So the more warm colors you get, the more droughty it is. And this is looking at the 30-day time scale where we only see one yellow SPI, and that's up in the northeast corner of the state, but pretty much everywhere else, we're looking at above average wet conditions, even into those purple colors, which is pretty much indicating the opposite of drought, a lot of water. Extending out into the 120-day time period, just to see how much that holds on. So this is going back to mid-February. We can see a lot of those wet SPIs continuing. Where you see grays, those are near normal. So again, we only see a couple of dots that are showing drier. And I didn't want to show all the time periods because it's pretty much a broken record. So I had to extend all the way out to 24 months to really show when we start to see a dry pattern emerge. And we don't see it on the 12-month, but we do see it when we go out 2 years. We start to see some of those drier SPIs popping out on the eastern plains, and the wetter pattern continues to hold in western Colorado. I'm only going to show a couple of these precipitation accumulation maps, but just to show kind of how the time period of when precipitation accumulates and how that compares to average. So this is looking at Pueblo, starting with the water year at October 1st. The black line shows how the precipitation has accumulated since the beginning of this water year compared to the average, which is the gray dashed line. And so you can see for a significant time period, it was below average. Pretty much you get to mid-April, late April, the precipitation accumulations at Pueblo were quite below average. And in fact, we had a drought all around Pueblo County at that time period. And then you can see some large accumulations start. So pretty much from late April to now, we've had enough significant accumulations to take us above that average line. And so as of June 18th, Pueblo is at 109% of average. And if we projected out from there and just had average precipitation for the rest of the water year, which would be the green dashed line, we'd finish at 105% of average. This also shows if I take a drier year, and say what will happen from this point on, we'd still end up around 95% of average. So not too bad. And I also wanted to shift over and look at Grand Junction, where we've seen some continued dry patterns over the last month, to see what that dry pattern has been doing. Well, Grand Junction started the water year really well. So going back to the beginning of October, accumulations were really consistent throughout the entire winter. And so once we got to mid-April, conditions were well above average at Grand Junction. So even though we haven't seen much accumulation at Grand Junction since mid-April, you can see here that black line only goes up a tiny bit, but stays more flat. We're still well above average. And in their 121-year record, there would only be a couple of dry scenarios that would take us below that average line. So overall, Grand Junction is going to end the water year well above average, I would expect. So typically in these presentations, I start talking about things like soil moisture and evaporative demand, but we don't really have a lot to talk about with that because the soils have been much wetter and evaporative demand has been low. So I wanted to bring up one example at our Coagmet station in Avondale, which is just southeast of Pueblo. And so what we're looking at here is how the reference evaporation from the station compares to what is typical. So the black line shows how evaporative demand normally accumulates at that station starting from April 1st. So by the time we get to June, we would expect about 16 inches of potential evaporative losses. And then the red line is the high, which occurred in 2012. The green line is the low, which occurred in 1997. And here's where we are, the blue line currently this year. We were tracking really close to average, but given the very wet second half of May and cloudy conditions, that evaporative demand has been much lower than average, which has brought us below that black line. And we see that widespread across the board when we're looking at evaporative demand at all of our sites across the state. All right, let's talk about drought or lack thereof. So here is the U.S. Drought Monitor map for the lower 48 states as of June 13th. So this one was released last Thursday. And looking around the country, we can see that the worst drought conditions are primarily confined to Kansas and eastern Nebraska. Colorado showing a lot of white there. I'm going to zoom into Colorado. This is going to be a surprise here. So this was from last year. I was updating my June presentation, and this map popped up from my June presentation to the task force last year, and I wanted to keep it up just to show basically the stark comparison between last year and this year. So this is what the drought coverage looked like last year, June 21st, and this is what it looks like as of last week. So big differences there. Quite the refreshing sight to see. This is the lowest drought coverage we've had since 2019. So right now we have a tiny bit of D1 drought remaining in Baca County in southeast Colorado. And then we have a few pockets of D0, but overall 93% of our state is not in any dry category. These are the changes to the drought monitor that we've seen just in the last 8 weeks. So going back to that mid-April time period, remember I showed Pueblo showing up very dry until mid-April when the faucet kind of turned on. So these are the magnitude of improvements we've seen on the U.S. Drought Monitor map, centered right over here around Pueblo County. we've seen a 4-category improvement. So they were showing up D3, and now they don't have anything over them really. And we've seen multiple category improvements across all of the Eastern Plains, with just a little bit of a dry pocket around the Continental Divide, Lake County, Eagle County, Pitkin County. So large scale improvements, very good to see. This is how the drought evolved. We were completely drought free and dry free in May and going into June of 2019. So this is looking at the percent of the state that was covered in a drought category. So here on the left side in summer of 2019, we had nothing, and then started introducing that D0 and into D1. So by August 28th, 2019, we had added 2% of the state into a D1 category. And from there, you can see how bad the drought got in 2020. That drought extended into 2021. It was covering different parts of the state at different times. There was a time that Northwest Colorado was being hit particularly hard. And then that shifted over to Northeast Colorado the next summer. But now you can see going into 2023, how we've seen a lot of those improvements. So that in this last week, less than 0.5% in D1. So we had 3 continuous solid years here in those D3, the red and maroon, D3 and D4 categories. All right, let's shift and look at what's coming up. Here's the 7-day precipitation forecast to show you that the pattern is looking to continue for at least a little bit longer. So the upper left corner shows that the total amount of precipitation accumulations from last night to next Monday night. So a 7-day accumulation map showing a lot of activity is continued to be expected over the northeastern corner of the state, a little bit less to the southeast, but some, and dry over western Colorado. The lower right-hand map shows how that compares to average. So we expect to continue to see above average precipitation in that 7-day forecast for Northeast Colorado. But then we do expect to see a little bit of a pattern shift. This is looking at the 8 to 14 day time period. So our 2-week outlook, that takes us from late June to early July. The Climate Prediction Center maps shown here. The left is the temperature outlook and the right is the precipitation outlook. So on the left-hand side, anywhere where you see those warm colors, those red colors, is a greater likelihood of warmer than average temperatures. You see the bullseye there over Texas, but that does extend into Colorado, where we're expecting it's more likely that we will have warmer than average conditions across the state. And then the precipitation pattern on the right side shows a slight leaning towards below average precipitation for the Four Corners area, with a very slight leaning of below average for the rest of the state showing up there. The big thing I do want to mention is the hazards outlook for this time period from the Climate Prediction Center show that there is a slight risk of excessive heat over a lot of the state. There's obviously that bullseye over Texas that goes along with that bullseye from the temperature outlook. But as we get into the end of June, a lot of our state could be at risk for excessive heat and much above normal temperatures. So that's something to keep in mind. Seasonal outlook was released last Thursday. So this is looking at the July, August, September time period. What do we expect from temperature on the left and precipitation on the right? So there's a leaning towards above average temperatures for that time period, particularly as you go towards the southwestern corner of the state. And we're also looking at the models showing a weaker monsoon, so that it's more likely that Southwest Colorado areas that benefit from the monsoon will be drier than average for that July, August, September time period. It also shows a favoring of above average precipitation over Nebraska, Kansas. So apparently this is a pattern that sets up when what we've seen in May and early June with the wetter conditions that have occurred across a lot of the Southwest United States and for us is correlated with a wetter pattern over the Great Plains later in the summer. And so that could be a setup where we would see continued activity over eastern Colorado extending from that. But overall, there's still uncertainty specifically what would happen over a lot of Colorado. All right, what's our El Nino forecast? So same thing from last week, the update to the El Nino forecast from the Climate Prediction Center. The graph on the left shows the likelihood of whether you'll have an El Nino, neutral, or La Nina conditions for the 3-month time period. So that first bar is for May, June, July. Next one is for June, July, August, and then so on and so forth. So the far right one is for January, February, March. And the red obviously shows that it is extremely likely that we will be in the El Nino. We are currently in the El Nino, and that is expected to continue through the fall, through the winter, and going into the spring. The graph on the right shows the individual models and what they're predicting for sea surface temperatures in that El Nino region. And so the green line is the statistical average that's taken, and then the red line is the computer model average, showing what will happen. So the warmer the sea surface temperature anomalies, the stronger the El Nino. And so almost all of the models are in that moderate El Nino range. A few going into the strong El Nino range, which would be a 1.5 degree anomaly or greater. And then a weak El Nino would stay in that 0.5 degree to 1 degree range. So that's where the El Nino currently stands. What does that mean for the summer and the fall, specifically for Colorado? This was a map I made a few years ago, and it was looking at the June, July, August precipitation anomalies for the country when taking all of the El Ninos together and averaging them out. So this is a composite using all El Nino summers. And what do we typically see across our state? And that pattern actually looks very similar to what we've been experiencing already, which is those wetter anomalies across a significant portion of the state, with the wettest anomalies popping up over the Denver metro area and extending into the Northeast plains. This is from the climate risks tool that is available from NOAA. It's a little bit outdated. I don't think they've added more recent years in, but it's a little bit of a helpful guide to show what's happened from previous El Ninos. So this is looking at the September, October, November time period, and what is the risk of a wet extreme or a dry extreme. So if you see a green color, it means in that fall time period, you're at an increased risk of wet extremes. And if you see the warmer colors, the yellows and oranges, like you see in the Pacific Northwest, they're at an increased risk for a dry extreme during that time. So basically, I want to point out that most of Colorado shows up with an increased risk for wet extremes during an El Nino fall. Does that mean we'll be wetter than average or that we'll have a wet extreme? Not necessarily, but it does mean that we lean more towards that way. And we also reduce the risk of dry extremes. So during an El Nino fall, the risk of going into drought is going to be low. So some of the key takeaways that I want to make sure that you all keep in mind as I wrap up the presentation here is that we've had consistent moisture, cooler temperatures, and low evaporative demand, and that has all contributed to drought recovery. And that is really on top of the snowpack story, the water supply story that NRCS folks are going to share with you next. That we could have a pattern shift to warmer and drier coming up as we get to the end of June. But it is almost certain that we will be in an El Nino at least until next spring. While the El Nino is not as good news when we're talking about the monsoon season, overall, El Nino conditions are pretty good for our state. It generally means more precipitation for our areas. So I don't really expect a repeat of 2019. Remember the drought time series I showed, 2019, we went into the summer, we were amazing, completely drought free, and then things started to deteriorate. But that's not something that I expect to see this fall, given the El Nino that we're in. So I do want to point out that regardless of recent temperature patterns that we've been experiencing or the El Nino that we're in, we can always expect that warmer than average conditions are going to return simply due to climate change, our warming climate. What we've experienced thus far is pretty anomalous to have that many months in a row. And so I wouldn't expect that to continue long term. I also want to point out that flooding is going to remain a concern for this summer, partially because we've boosted our soils, our soil moisture. We've boosted all of our rivers. We've had some minor flooding concerns on a lot of areas. West Slope, we've had flooding concerns because of snowmelt. East Plains, we've had flooding concerns just due to all the moisture that we've received since the beginning of May. And because of all this, and because we could still have some heavy precipitation events as we get into late summer, particularly over the Eastern Plains, I would expect that there might be some flooding issues, and also that we still need to consider areas where there are burn scars, and that those areas are going to be very vulnerable this summer. Distant future, I want you to be aware. I've seen some really tall weeds coming up in the open grasslands. And so all this moisture that we've been receiving has led to kind of explosive growth in a lot of area. And at some point, we're going to dry out again. And all that vegetation is going to dry out. And that will ultimately increase the risk of larger fires once we get drier, because there's so much that will be available to burn. And the final point that I want to remind, despite all this good news, I just want to keep us in check to remember we live in Colorado. So in other words, it will dry out again. We're not going to stay in this wet pattern forever, but enjoy it while it lasts. That's all I've got.
Thanks, Becky. That's looking like really good news for Colorado. If we have a moment, if people have any questions, feel free to chime in with your questions. I'm sure Becky would be happy to answer.
Absolutely.
Okay, quiet group today. Well, in that case, I think we can turn it over to NRCS. I think we've got Carl on the line here to share his screen. To Carl, right, today?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. And can you guys see that?
We can see it. It's not in presentation mode.
Okay, there
There
we
we
go.
go.
All right. Well, yeah, thanks as usual for everyone for joining, and thanks to Becky for that great presentation and kind of teeing up this portion of it. With more and more snow melting, I'm definitely going to focus more on what's been going on with mountain precipitation specifically, some of our observed stream flows and forecasts for the June through July period, as well as what's been going on with reservoir storage. But yep, I will go ahead and just jump right in per usual. We'll kind of go around all the major basins of the state, and then kind of zoom out and look at some statewide summary stuff here at the end. So up in Northwest Colorado in the combined Yampa and White basins, what this map is showing, as well as a lot of my other snowpack products, is just the actual inches of snow water equivalent station by station. I've tried to kind of veer away from the usual percent of normal stuff. It's particularly this late in the meltout season, just because those numbers can be a little bit deceiving depending on timing. I'd still encourage folks to look at what peak snowpack was, look at water year to date precipitation, things like that. But just a quick preface there, but I just kind of wanted to show some of these maps where snow is holding on. The vast majority of SNOTEL sites in Colorado have melted out. But we've still got a few holding on quite a bit. We've got Tower up here above Steamboat Springs, still has 15 inches, as well as just a handful of other sites. But just want to show, and also just for reference, pretty much all SNOTELs within Colorado are between 8,500 and about 11,500 feet. So there certainly still is significant amounts of snow up in higher elevations, up in alpine zones across the state. So this isn't necessarily more today, but just wanted to show certainly still here down north of I-70 and kind of the southern part of the flat top still has 20 inches of SWE. But yeah, still a fair amount of snow. And one other plug about all this data, since we had yesterday off of work, this is from the end of last week. So a little bit older, but hopefully should still paint the picture pretty well. So water year to date precipitation up in the Yampa is currently at about 115% of normal. And over to the east in the combined Laramie and North Platte basins, slightly less, but still above normal as it has been through all of 2023 at about 107% of normal. Looking at reservoir storage, not a ton of storage in these basins, but looking pretty good. You
Hey, Carl, your audio is cutting out. It's totally gone, actually, at this point. I think we lost Carl. Let's give him a second and see if he can jump back on. While we're waiting for Carl, I do have kind of an exciting announcement to make. we have Emily Adrid on our call today. She's our newest staffer at CWCB. This is literally her first day, and she is our new water planning and climate impact specialist. And Emily, if you are able to maybe just pop on camera and say hello. Emily will probably be leading these meetings, hopefully starting next month. We'll see how the transition goes, but
Yeah.
welcome,
Hi.
Emily.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, my name is Emily Adrid. Yeah, this is my very first day, so I am just ready to learn a lot, and I'm really excited to be here. So thank you all. I'm really looking forward to working with you all.
Thanks, Emily. And looks like we're still waiting on Carl here. So let me see if I can get a hold of him. Hang on. Okay, I think we've got Carl back. He's back. He's joining right now. Carl, do we have you?
Okay, I don't know what happened there. Zoom just decided to kick me out.
Okay, well, we can hear you now, so that's a good sign. Let me just give you your co-host privileges back. And
Yeah,
you should
sorry.
be able to share.
Sorry about that, everyone. I not sure how far I got there. And then all of a sudden Zoom was saying trying to reconnect, and then it didn't want to do that, but technology. Okay. Where did you lose me?
You were showing the reservoir plots for the Yampa. Yeah, that one.
Oh, okay. All right, thank you. So again, sorry about that. But so we had one thing we'll see across Colorado, and I'll show some of this next, is definitely our streamflow runoff for our full forecast period, which is generally April through July, is certainly looking like it was going to be kind of front loaded this year, particularly with May volumetric stream flows being particularly high. But here on the far right side of the graph, you can really see these big contributions throughout the month of May to reservoir storage, bringing it back up above normal. So here is our May observed stream flow. You can see very, very significant, nearly double the normal volumes throughout the month of May. And really not even a lot of outliers on the low side. Way up high on the Yampa at Steamboat was 163% of normal, wide at Meeker 175. But then some of the major 4 points, Yampa at Maybell was about 200% of normal, 199. Then Little Snake near Lily right before it goes into Dinosaur National Monument was at 210% of normal in May. So really, really significant runoff volumes and a bit front loaded, which we will see here in our forecast for the remaining June through July period. Looking at still above normal volumes, but certainly on a percentage basis, significantly less than we saw in May and really April as well. Basin wide, looking at 122% of normal volumes for June through July is the current forecast. Moving down into the Colorado River Basin, again, kind of just a snapshot of some of our SWE on the ground. Certainly some handful of stations here in kind of the southern flat tops had 20 inches of SWE at the end of last week. Park Reservoir, Snowtell up on the Grand Mesa had similar values. Schofield Pass, which generally accumulates quite a bit, as well as Fremont Pass. But again, just want to highlight that certainly a vast majority of our SNOTEL sites have melted out, but there still is snow up there at the higher elevations and pretty substantial amounts in some cases. So that has left water year to date precipitation at 113% of normal in the Colorado. Taking a look at reservoir storage, certainly some above and some below. Got Green Mountain and Granby certainly on the higher end. Dillon Reservoir pretty slightly below, but near normal there. Certainly an important contributor to water supplies in the Denver metro area there. And going back to our time series, again, similar to our previous basin, can see a pretty big jump just over the last month here, bringing the total basin volumetric storage to pretty well above normal values. And then taking a look at our observed stream flows throughout the month of May, certainly a fair amount of variability here, more than we saw on the Yampa and White. Some on the lower end in the blue at below Dillon Reservoirs at 98% of normal, little bit higher down near Green Mountain. Then I'll just kind of jump to the main basin outlet here, the Colorado at Cameo, down as you get closer to Grand Junction, reported 173% of normal monthly volume, which is really, really significant. There was just a pretty impressive amount of water coming down through there, and as we'll see in a little bit in the Gunnison as well, which is certainly helping to contribute to volumes at Lake Powell, which naturally have a pretty big impact on the whole upper basin in the big picture. So jump into our forecasts again. It's really looking like that total seasonal volume is certainly front loaded in the first 2 months. Colorado at Cameo here for the June-July period is forecasted to have 99% of normal volume compared to that 175% that was observed in May. And also kind of drying out further up in the main stem headwaters here, with the blue at Dillon remaining kind of on the low end as far as forecasts go. And over into the South Platte, taking a look at our SNOTELs here. This is a basin where you can definitely tell, at least again, as measured by SNOTEL, certainly still fair amount of snow up in the Alpine. But as far as our SNOTEL stations are concerned in the actual South Platte Basin proper, pretty much melted out. There's a couple of these values, but these are going to largely be artifacts of fluctuations in the data. But you know, all below a ½ inch there, basically indicating that those have melted out. So some of the recent precipitation through May and June has finally brought the water year-to-date precipitation into the South Platte to just above normal at 102% of the median. Taking a look at reservoir storage here, just at a glance, you can see certainly a vast majority of the major reservoirs in the South Platte currently holding above normal stream flow volumes. And we can see that May runoff definitely bumped that basin-wide total storage from a bit below to a bit above there, which is great news as we head further into summer. So here's our May observed stream flow, pretty much above normal across the board at all the points we measure. We do not have data yet for a lot of these Northern Front Range tributaries. And that's something that just kind of happens every year. There's a lot of complicated adjustments that we get some help from Northern Water on. So unfortunately, we don't have those. One thing I'll highlight in particular are these points in the main stem headwaters here in the southern part of the basin, which did have above normal May runoffs. But throughout the year, their total stream flow forecasts have been on the low end statewide. So you can see a really significant drop that a lot of the snow melt driven runoff that we're anticipating has already occurred. So certainly a lot of these main stem South Platte forecasts for the June-July period are quite low, generally in the 60 to 65% of normal range. And then generally kind of trending upward closer and closer to normal as we move more northward. And going back to the western slope over into the Gunnison Basin, again, just a quick snapshot of what's going on at individual snowtell sites. Got Park Reservoir up here on the Grand Mesa, which we already noted as it borders with the Colorado. Schofield Pass between Crested Butte and Marble there, still holding on to 9.6 inches, as well as a little bit at Red Mountain Pass, but certainly melting out more and more of these snowtells every day. So water year to date precipitation in the Gunnison currently 137% of normal. You can see it's based on these colored shadings of near the 90th percentile compared to the period of record. Certainly as we move into the Gunnison, great news for reservoir storage. We've really seen some dramatic increases, by far the most dramatic increases in reservoir storage anywhere in the state. And the Gunnison and our combined Southwest basins have been holding by far the lowest reservoir storages for the last 3 years. So certainly encouraging to see those values. I didn't check how Blue Mesa, our largest reservoir in the state, was doing as of today, but I can certainly imagine it's only continued to go up. I won't necessarily comment on its fullness, since my apologies, I forgot to check that. But since this data is about 3 weeks old now, and we still have been seeing strong stream flows, I would anticipate these numbers to continue to have risen over the last 3 weeks. And here in another 10 days or so, we will have that data available. So here are kind of longer term time series plot going back to the early 90s, really highlights these increases, how we went from storages in the range of some of the lowest we've really seen over the last 30 years, back up to pretty much near normal values as of June 1st, with that really huge contribution coming just from that last month of May. So here's our May observed stream flows across the Gunnison, totaling at just barely under twice the normal total volumes. You can see here's really important one. Gunnison at Blue Mesa was 163% of normal. Really big contributions from the North Fork of the Gunnison Basin here, or North Fork of the Gunnison River. Surface Creek at Cedar Edge was over 350% of normal. Muddy Creek below Paonia Reservoir, nearly 300%. So really significant contributions there. Leading to our major pour point at Grand Junction, which was 219% of normal May observed flows. Just pretty impressive to watch. I think the Gunnison at Grand Junction might have been flowing at 12,000 or more CFS for a good bit, which is a ton of water heading downstream there. So going into our June and July forecasts, basin-wide averaging out at 140% of normal total volume for this month and next month. So a significant drop over what was observed in May, but still looking at well above normal stream flows are to be anticipated over the next month and a half or so. Going down into our combined Southwest basins of the San Miguel, Dolores, Animas, and San Juan. Here's our snowtell snapshot. Again, vast majority of these have melted out. As of the end of last week, we had just a tiny bit up on Red Mountain Pass. That is likely since diminished with some warmer temperatures. We've got which is this maybe Black Mesa over here, I believe, has 24 inches of SWE at the Snowtell site still. So it's certainly still up there, and something to keep an eye on as we move forward. And, you know, one thing to really highlight in particular is that the fact that we do even still have a handful of these higher elevation snowtells holding on to significant snowpacks below tree line certainly kind of tells the tale that we can anticipate that there must be well above normal snowpacks up in the Alpine. And, you know, for those looking to dig in, you can certainly take a peek at the data. I'm not sure what the ASO flight schedule is, but, you know, they'll be measuring some, or maybe they have recently, but I know they've been planning on measuring a lot of that higher elevation snow and in selected basins. So looking at our water year to date precip, currently 131% of normal. Can see bumped into record territory here right around the time of peak snowpack, currently sitting a little bit below the 90th percentile. Moving into reservoir storage, haven't seen quite the increases that were observed in the Gunnison, but still very significant. One big difference here is you can see the contribution of stream flow runoff in April, as opposed to some of the other basins where April was above normal, but then May really boosted it. You can see there's pretty much equal contributions to those increases in reservoir storage through April and May here. A lot of that we're kind of presuming was due to above normal lower elevation snowpack melting out a little bit earlier than some of the higher elevation areas. So here's our observed stream flow in the month of May. Total basin volume is actually relatively similar to the Gunnison with respect to normal values at 197% of normal. Kind of and as anticipated based on our snowpack and forecasts, the Dolores was kind of the big winner there from a stream flow standpoint. But most of these still very significant. Animus at Durango was on the low end at 164% of normal, but that is certainly nothing to sneeze at. Very, very significant volumes. And then similar to really everywhere in the state, moving into our June through July forecast period here. Percent of normal wise, these are lower than what we observed in May, but still well above normal for these combined Southwest basins. And on into the Rio Grande. So we can see here really in these snowtell sites surrounding the kind of rim of the Rio Grande Basin, really not pretty much all melted out is the short story there. But again, in a big snowpack year like this, particularly along the west side of the basin, I'd certainly imagine there's still a fair amount of snow up in the alpine zones. You can't tell from a plot this time of year, but another big point to make about snowpack in the Rio Grande was the very, very substantial difference from west to east. With the San Juans, these kind of eastern San Juan zones, did receive a well above normal snowpack, whereas pretty much the entirety of the Sangre de Cristos did remain one of the drier parts of the state throughout this water year so far, at least with respect to our mountainous regions. So pretty big differences east to west in the Rio Grande. And moving on into our water year to date precipitation. Oops, sorry. Just realized some of my slides I intended are not showing up here, but not a huge deal. But yeah, currently 112% of normal there. Moving on into reservoir storage. So looking at the current percent of normal storage within the reservoirs, quite a bit of variability, some well above normal, some a bit below. But you can see total basin-wide storage is well above normal. And again, really big jump with those substantial May stream flows. Getting those values well above what has been seen since that last big spike in 2019. So certainly good news there as we go into an uncertain future. So moving into our May observed stream flow for the Rio Grande. Here, even just at a glance, you can kind of see what I was noting with some of the east-west differences with some of these tributaries that are coming out of our southern Sangre de Cristos. Certainly lower in May, whereas everything coming out of the western side of the basin, well above normal. But total volumes within the basin were at 182% of the median stream flow throughout the month of May. And again, as has been observed, this one, I stuck with the June-July period. So we do have a handful missing that actually have June through August, but as their primary, as opposed to the June through July. But you can still kind of see the trend with the June-July period anticipated to have lower percent of normal stream flows than we saw in May, or I could even probably just say April and May. But tributaries, or the main stem and tributaries coming out of the west side of the basin, certainly doing a little bit better. And again, my apologies, I neglected to switch this one through the June through July, but these southern tributaries out of the Sangres here are certainly going to be anticipating significantly lower stream flow over the coming months compared to some things further west. So on into the Arkansas. As far as SNOTEL is concerned, really the only station that we have still holding snow is way up in the main stem headwaters here at Fremont Pass. As of the end of last week, had 5.6 inches of SWE. The Arkansas was, with respect to snowpack, was highly variable between these headwaters areas and the tributaries coming out of the Sangres. Kind of similar story to the Rio Grande. So for folks invested in the Arkansas, I'd certainly encourage you to focus in on your sub-basin or your region of interest, because we did see pretty significant differences from things coming out of the main stem versus these southern tributaries, which were quite a bit drier. Basin-wide though, water year precipitation currently right at normal values at 100% of the 30-year median. Going into reservoir storage, quite a bit of variability. I won't dive into these individual ones necessarily, but we can see here in our long-term time series, definitely got a bit of an increase here in May, bringing it to levels not seen since it looks like 2020, as it was dropping from the big boost in 2019. So that's certainly good news, but not quite the increase we saw in some of our western slope basins. So here is our May observed stream flow. And again, you can kind of see what I was talking about with the pretty big differences north to south, with some of these tributaries up north. Chalk Creek at Nathrop had 184% of normal. Arkansas at Salida was 112. Down at Pueblo was slightly below normal at 96%. And then as we get down a little further south, certainly some lower values there, ranging from, it looks like, about 77 to 90% of normal. And then going into our June through July forecasts, again, quite a bit lower than what we saw in May, with Arkansas at Salida at 91%. 85% at Pueblo. And some of these southern tributaries actually not necessarily seeing the drop that we did between what was observed in May and what we are anticipating for the full June through July period. But certainly something to keep a close eye on there regardless. But going into our basin-wide summary, again, just I didn't label the depths on this one because it got a little cluttered, but basically any sites with colored dots here are ones that were still holding some degree of snow as of the end of last week. You can certainly see even out of those that are going to be on the western slope or on the boundary of the western slope in the case of Tower up by Steamboat here. But I won't dwell on that too much. So here's our statewide time series SWE. Again, why you can kind of see here why I've been veering away from referring to the percent of normal. It's currently, or at the end of last week, was reporting at 376% of normal. But in this time of year, that can largely be as much of a function of timing as opposed to total SWE depth and SWE depth that was there. So certainly encourage people to always look at the full picture, see what peak was. But we can see at peak snowpack in early April, we were probably approaching into the 95th percentile of observed snowpacks on the record. So certainly very, very impressive statewide, even with some of the dry areas in our, I want to say southeast Colorado, but the most southeast mountainous regions, largely thinking about the Sangre de Cristos and some of the areas surrounding the South Platte headwaters around South Park. But other than those areas, very, very significant snowpack this year. So here's our current water year to date precipitation. Statewide is at 114% of the median. And as one would anticipate, I imagine this has kind of been beat to death this year, but pretty considerable differences along the continental divide here, with western slope basins receiving quite a bit more precipitation since October 1st of last year than basins that are going to be flowing east. And here's our month-to-date precipitation. I know Becky touched on this really well, but kind of zooming in on our mountain stations specifically, really, really significant increases relative to normal at our SNOTEL stations over the last. This was basically the first half of June. This was through the end of day on June 15th. But these values probably with a drier weekend dropped a little bit. But also in bearing in mind that June may not necessarily be the wettest month climatologically, but certainly some very, very impressive precipitation numbers regardless. So going into our time series chart here, you can see pretty much since the beginning of the calendar year or slightly after, statewide, we've been holding well above normal precipitation values at SNOTEL sites, currently to that 114% of the median where we sit now. So we're just taking a step back a month here. This is our May 1st reservoir storage statewide. We did see some good increases from April 1st to May 1st, particularly in the southwest basins here. But they were still well above normal, with a lot of the rest of the basins holding values generally, I'll just say, kind of surrounding normal, plus or minus 8% below and 4% above. But then going to June 1st, certainly see our biggest increase there in the Gunnison. Going to be driven a lot by increases in Blue Mesa. Big increase in our southwest basins as well, not quite up to normal, but I'll just kind of flip back and forth there one more time. Really encouraging to see kind of all of our major basins show at least some degree of increase, and some were quite significant. So going to our time series here, this plot, I know it's a lot to soak in at a glance, but I'd kind of gear your eye towards this blue line here that kind of dips the lowest, is the total statewide volumetric reservoir storage as a departure from normal. So this bottom blue line is a summation of all of our other ones. But you can see that really over the last several months, May certainly helped a lot, but over the last several months, increases in the Gunnison, which is the yellow, and our combined southwest basins, which is this greenish color, have really helped to boost our total statewide reservoir storage back up to, I believe, above normal values on the whole. So going in back, we've seen all of this, but our May observed stream flow statewide, again, really impressive numbers coming out of the entirety of the western slope. But still every major basin had above normal May observed stream flow volumes. With kind of the exception being some of these southern streams coming out of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains here were some of the only ones that did observe below normal May stream flows. And onto our forecast for the June-July period. This is kind of looking back more at what we've been forecasting throughout the water year, with some below normal values in the South Platte and the Arkansas. The average of forecasts across the Colorado headwaters is dipped below normal for these final 2 months of the forecast period, with the remaining basins of Western Colorado as well as the Rio Grande being forecasted for above normal June through July volumes. And here's our surface water supply index. Here's what it was for May 1st. And then you'll notice a lot of these values for June 1st have actually dropped a bit, and someone with the state could probably verify this, but I'm guessing that is due to the stream flow forecast being less for the June through July period relative to the full April through July. Not positive there, but generally still looking obviously substantially higher numbers across Western Colorado, but dropped quite a bit since May 1st. And then certainly the South Platte and the Arkansas are on the lower end of the spectrum. But just to wrap things up, just some quick take-home points. The most SNOTEL sites in Colorado are melted out. I believe it was around 15 or so at the end of last week out of 115 that did still have measurable snow on the pillows there. But yeah, snowpack melting out there, but with the big year, can certainly make a pretty confident assumption that snow up in the alpine zones is probably still well above normal, particularly across much of Western Colorado. Water year-to-date precipitation is near to well above normal in all major basins. June-to-date precipitation has been quite significant, so starting the summer off pretty strong there. Really, those May stream flow volumes, I should have pulled in some of how they rank compared to the period of record as far as records or percentiles, but I can only imagine a lot of these Western slope rivers must have put up some pretty impressive numbers relative to the period of record observed flows. Again, that are, the forecasts that we've been issuing throughout the year for the full April through July with that significant May runoff have definitely been front loaded. So that's something to certainly keep on your radar, that a lot of the water that is going to come down through that from the primary snowmelt runoff season has already done so. I'm still anticipating well above normal stream flows, particularly in Western Colorado. But if the total April-July forecast was 175% of normal, we can anticipate that to be a lower number for June-July, just as kind of a rough example. And yeah, on reservoir storage, really encouraging to see a lot of the increases we have over the last couple months, particularly in the Gunnison and our combined Southwest basins, which have really been struggling with several dry years in a row. Seeing those reservoirs boost up. At last I checked, I believe like McPhee is probably getting really close to full. I don't know if Ken's on the call, he can comment on that, but Blue Mesa, I believe, is probably well on track to getting closer and closer to full as well. But yeah, that is all I had for now, and happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Carl. Are there any questions for Carl? Well, I would just like to kind of note that given the conditions and what we're seeing in SPI and the drought monitor, we're looking like we have moved into more like normal conditions, which would be a time where we can start to consider deactivating our ag impact task forces, our muni task forces, and our drought task force that are all that all flow from the conditions monitoring that happens at this water availability task force meeting. So I just wanted to mention that because it looks like that's something that we can more confidently move towards doing at this point. With that in mind, I just wanted to kind of go out to our water providers as well and get updates from water providers on the ground. I see a few of you guys on the call. Feel free to jump in. Otherwise, I'll start calling on you. I see Swithin at Highlands Ranch, maybe jump on, or Jordan Saldano. Who else do we have out there?
I can go, Kat.
Thank you.
Yep, no problem, for Denver Water here. So our reservoirs are currently at about 95% full. Normal for this time of year would be 92% full. So obviously been enjoying the good conditions over here. Our demand this summer has been off to a slow start just because of all the rain, but I'm sure it will pick up once we have some more prolonged hotter and drier weather. But other than that, no major updates for us.
Awesome, thanks. Sounds like Zoom isn't letting everyone unmute. Sorry if I'm preventing you from unmuting. I don't think I am, but you can put any updates you have into the chat, so then we can relay them out to the group. Anyone else want to jump on? I see someone from Evergreen, Castle Rock.
Hi, here is Colorado Springs Utilities,
Oh,
A10
hi.
Bravo. We don't have very far conditions. Our demands are very low. It's currently decreased in about 33% from last year.
Wow.
And because of that, our reservoirs are pretty high too. So they're currently in 83% and our normally is 78 for this time of the year.
Great, thank you for that update.
Thank you.
All right, well, I will give one last opportunity for our water providers to chime in. All right, thanks, Swithin. All reservoirs are full, low demand, not much irrigation, still Free River on South Platte. Loving the relief from the past 3 years. I think that's a common sentiment. Thanks for that update, really appreciate it. Anyone else want to chime in? All right, well, if not, thanks to all of you for joining, and I think we can close our meeting today if there are no other comments. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.